The date is April 4th, 1993. WrestleMania IX unfolds before a packed crowd at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada. The air crackles with tension as Yokozuna faces Bret Hart for the World Heavyweight Championship. In a moment that will become etched in wrestling lore, Mr. Fuji hurls a handful of salt into Hart's eyes, blinding the champion and enabling Yokozuna to clinch victory. This singular moment encapsulates the profound influence of managers in professional wrestling, strategic architects who transformed mere athletes into legendary characters. This is why we have Mr. Fuji at number 15. Yes, he undoubtedly deserves a higher ranking, but his strategic placement here serves our narrative's architectural demands as a suitable entry point. Mr. Fuji represented the quintessential heel manager, a master of psychological warfare and underhanded tactics. Adorned in traditional Japanese attire, complete with a meticulously styled mustache, Fuji personified calculated malevolence. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, he managed some of the most formidable wrestlers in the Federation. Yokozuna, his most famous client, became World Heavyweight Champion under Fuji's guidance. Earlier, he managed dominant forces like Don Muraco and Kamala, utilizing his strategic acumen to elevate their intimidation factor. His signature move, throwing salt into opponents' eyes, became a legendary tactic that symbolized his commitment to winning at any cost. Number 14, Lanny Poo's persona, the genius, existed as the strategic architect behind Mr. Perfect and the Beverly Brothers, transforming from a seemingly ridiculous academic caricature into a masterful manipulator of wrestling's psychological landscape. His theatrical performances, complete with mortarboard and meticulously crafted poetry, concealed a sinister intellect capable of orchestrating complex machinations, most notably his audacious plot against Hulk Hogan that demonstrated the profound tactical depth behind his comedic veneer. Poo weaponized intellectual condescension into a form of wrestling artistry that transcended mere performance. Number 13, often overlooked in mainstream wrestling narratives, Oliver Humperdink represented a bridge between old-school wrestling management and emerging narrative complexity. His gravelly voice and imposing presence made him a memorable figure, particularly in managing larger-than-life wrestlers like Bam Bam Bigelow and Paul Orndorff. While his Federation tenure was relatively brief compared to other managers on this list, Humperdink's impact was significant. He understood the art of creating narrative tension, transforming his clients from mere wrestlers into compelling characters that audiences loved to hate. Number 12, Harvey Whippman epitomized the archetypal wrestling manager who thrived on chaos and opportunism. His shrill voice and diminutive stature belied a profound understanding of wrestling psychology. Managing wrestlers like Giant Gonzalez and Sid Justice, Whippleman demonstrated an uncanny ability to align himself with physically imposing performers. What set Whippleman apart was his willingness to actively participate in wrestling storytelling. He wasn't content to remain a passive ringside figure, but actively inserted himself into narratives, often becoming a focal point of conflict. His feuds with ring announcers and other managers added layers of complexity to wrestling storylines. Number 11, Sensational Sherry transcended the traditional manager role, becoming a revolutionary figure who challenged gender expectations in professional wrestling. More than a manager, she was a performer who could wrestle, provoke, and manipulate with extraordinary skill. Managing high-profile wrestlers like Randy Savage, the $1 Million Man, and Shawn Michaels, Sherry brought an unprecedented level of sophistication to her role. She could transform from a seductive provocateur to a fierce combatant in moments. Her performances suggested that managers were not peripheral characters, but integral components of wrestling storytelling. Number 10, Johnny Valiant represented the prototypical motor-mouthed manager who could transform a wrestling match into a verbal battleground. His rapid-fire commentary and outrageous personality made him a standout performer, particularly during his management of the Dream Team Tag Team and later the Briscoe Brothers. His promos were less scripted performances and more stream-of-consciousness explosions of wit and provocation. He could generate audience hatred with a single phrase, turning wrestling into a psychological chess match where words were as potent as physical strikes. His partnership with Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake demonstrated how a skilled manager could elevate mid-tier wrestlers into memorable characters. Number 9, armed with a tennis racket and a vocabulary that could decimate opponents verbally, Jim Cornette transcended the traditional manager role. He wasn't just a ringside figure, but a narrative architect who could generate heat through pure verbal virtuosity. Managing legendary wrestlers like Vader, Yokozuna, Davey Boy Smith, and the Midnight Express, Cornette brought a tactical complexity to wrestling management. His promos were meticulously crafted tirades that could make audiences simultaneously laugh and despise him. Unlike many managers, who were mere accessories to wrestlers, Cornette was a central character who could drive entire storylines. Number 8. Managing the legendary Legion of Doom, Paul Ellering was less a traditional manager and more a calculated mastermind who complemented his client's intimidating physical presence with undeniable intellect. Unlike many managers who relied on theatricality, Ellering projected a calm, almost professorial demeanor that contrasted brilliantly with the Road Warrior's explosive violence. He appeared less like a wrestling manager and more like a military strategist guiding elite warriors. This unique approach transformed the Road Warriors from mere wrestlers into mythological figures. Number 7. With his rotund physique, rubber band-adorned face, and bombastic personality, Captain Lou Albano became synonymous with the Federation's golden era. Managing teams like the Wild Samoans and solo wrestlers such as Jimmy Snuka, Albano brought an unprecedented level of charisma to wrestling management. His connections extended beyond wrestling. He famously appeared in Cyndi Lauper's music videos and became a crossover pop culture icon. This ability to transcend wrestling's traditional boundaries made him revolutionary. Number 6. Unlike her male counterparts who relied on verbal aggression or physical interference, Miss Elizabeth weaponized elegance and emotional complexity. Her primary client, Randy Savage, became one of wrestling's most iconic figures, partially through their complex relationship. Elizabeth wasn't just a manager, but a narrative catalyst. She could generate more audience reaction with a single glance than most managers could with lengthy promos. Her restraint and dignity transformed her from a mere valet into an unparalleled figure who expanded wrestling's storytelling potential. Number 5. Freddy Blasi epitomized the old-school wrestling manager, a figure who bridged multiple wrestling eras with his uncompromising persona. Known as Classy Freddy Blasi, he managed wrestlers like the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, helping shape the Federation's transition from regional territories to national prominence. His trademark move of biting opponents and drawing blood became legendary, symbolizing his embodiment of wrestling's most primal narrative elements. Number 4. As one of the first prominent black managers in a predominantly white wrestling landscape, Slick brought unprecedented representation and complexity to his role. Managing wrestlers like the One Man Gang, the Warlord, and the Twin Towers, Slick's character was sophisticated, intelligent, and deeply charismatic. He used humor and verbal acuity to navigate wrestling's complex racial dynamics, transforming potential racial caricatures into nuanced characters. Number 3. Paul Bearer reconstructed wrestling management into a supernatural art form. Managing The Undertaker, Bearer wasn't just a manager, but a narrative alchemist who could generate genuine audience dread through pure performance. His pale complexion, funeral attire, and high-pitched voice created a character that defied wrestling's traditional boundaries. Bearer didn't just manage The Undertaker, he was essential to creating the most elaborate mythology in wrestling history. Their partnership transcended typical wrestler-manager relationships, becoming a complex narrative of supernatural allegiance. Bearer understood that in professional wrestling, character work could be more important than physical performance. He turned The Undertaker from a mere wrestler into a generational icon, proving that mythology could be as compelling as muscular spectacle. Number 2. Jimmy Hart represented the supreme wrestling manager, a performer who could generate more audience reaction through verbal performance than most wrestlers could through physical conflict. Managing wrestlers and teams across multiple eras, including the Hart Foundation and the Honky Tonk Man, Hart was a narrative perpetual motion machine. His trademark megaphone wasn't just a prop, but a weapon of cerebral warfare. The mouth of the South could generate heat faster and more effectively than almost any manager in wrestling history. His musical background allowed him to craft entrance themes that became integral to wrestlers' characters, transforming musical performance into narrative strategy. Hart's longevity and adaptability made him more than a manager. He was a wrestling institution who understood that entertainment was the core of professional wrestling's appeal. Number 1. Bobby the Brain Heenan wasn't just a manager, He was the apotheosis of wrestling management. His verbal dexterity, comedic timing, and profound understanding of wrestling psychology made him not simply a manager, but a narrative philosopher who elevated wrestling from spectacle to art form. Managing wrestlers like Andre the Giant, Mr. Perfect, and ravishing Rick Rude, Heenan transformed management from a peripheral role to a central narrative mechanism. His commentary work further cemented his legacy, proving that wrestling storytelling extended far beyond the ring. Heenan could generate more compelling narratives through a single witty comment than most wrestlers could through entire matches. More than any other manager, Bobby Heenan understood that professional wrestling was a complex performance. He treated each match, each interaction, as an opportunity for narrative innovation, setting standards that would influence wrestling for generations. Heenan's mastery of bending the rules and his ability to draw thunderous boos with mere presence elevated him to a rarefied status in wrestling, pairing him with Andre the Giant for the iconic WrestleMania III showdown against Hulk Hogan, underscored his immense value to the Federation, even without stepping into the ring as a competitor. By the way, if you're curious to learn more about Rick Rude, one of Heenan's most legendary clients, then prepare to embark on a journey into his meteoric rise through the ranks of wrestling stardom, a tale of unparalleled swagger, muscle-bound magnificence, and raw, unbridled talent, and ultimately of a tragically truncated career. With one click or tap of the thumbnail appearing on your screen, you'll unlock the riveting narrative of a man whose wrestling prowess and magnetic personality blazed across the wrestling firmament like a brilliant, all-too-brief supernova, leaving an indelible mark on the sport before his heartbreakingly premature departure. Thank you for watching.